So nearly 2 years ago to the day, I had a conversation that basically changed the course of my entire career. That conversation was with this man right here. His name is Garth Richardson, a legendary rock and metal producer responsible for some of the greatest hits of the 90s and 2000s, like, for example, Rage Against the Machine by Rage Against the Machine. And during that conversation, he said something that stuck harder than any other piece of advice I'd ever been given. He told me this fact about a man named Andy Wallace.
Andy Wallace, Chris Shaw, actually Joe Roberston. They only have one EQ and they maybe have a compressor. That's it. Everybody that now puts on 13 different compressors and they put all this, like they can put, plugins for days and days and days. Right. Stop that. Just pick one EQ and pick one compressor.
The best mixers out there use one EQ and one compressor. That's like a sculptor working with just a hammer and a chisel. It is like basically master level shit. Jeff Buckley was both produced and mixed by Andy Wallace. And considering that, today we're going to try and do it. We're going to analyze the production and the mixing techniques used on Jeff Buckley's Grace with a fine-tooth comb, and then translate those techniques into a live performance. This will be done on Universal Audio's new 876 volt with help from some of my Apollo interfaces. And the only plugin we're going to try and use is the SSL channel strip. Welcome to Forensic Productions' Jeff Buckley. Launch the title screen. So if I was going to make a scale of creative influence to creative output, I don't think there's anybody that comes close to Jeff Buckley. He's been cited as directly influencing Thom Yorke, Matt Bellamy, Chris Martin. Those are like the three British trio people. But there's more. Lana Del Rey, Adele, Eddie Vedder, Chris Cornell. I could go on. And with a career that only had one album, Grace. He gained prominence in the local scene in Manhattan during the 90s, particularly in the East Village. I mean, some of these venues that he's played at, I go to pretty often. Mercury Lounge, Arlene's Grocery, and most notably, Shinee. To simplify the story a little bit, he got a regular spot at Shinee, which was an old venue that doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. He would play every single Monday, and he started amassing a crowd at these shows, until eventually an exec from Columbia Records went to one of these shows and signed him. Shortly after, in 1993, Jeff Buckley began work on Grace. That's when Jeff decided to work with Andy Wallace, and he had to find a band. He was solo at this point. They auditioned a bunch of bassists and drummers, eventually deciding on Matt Johnson for drums and Mike Grundahl for bass. The group then headed to Bearsville Studios in order to record the record. Let's talk about some gear. Jeff used a now iconic 1983 Fender Telecaster. That was gifted to him because his original guitar was stolen. It had a top-loaded bridge. Top-loaded bridges are supposed to have a bit more of a snappier, more flexible kind of string sound. It had a mirror pickguard, and it also had a Seymour Duncan hot rail in the bridge. Now here's the thing. I don't know when the hot rail was added. I know it was added somewhere between the production of Grace and whenever Grace was finished. I don't know if it was attached during the beginning of production or halfway through or right at the end. And actually, Matt Bellamy from Muse now owns this guitar. He paid $50,000 for it. Most accounts have Mike rocking a Fender Jazz bass. And check out this clip of Matt mentioning the kit that he used.
During the recording, I would switch drum kits more or less per song. I had a couple of different approaches. So I set up an older, like a 60s Slingerland kit, very small, a 20-inch kick drum, 12-inch tom on a 14-inch floor tom. The snare, du jour per track for that kit would change.
We do have a Slingerland kit. This one is from the 70s, so it's kind of from the era where Slingerland was trying to compete with Ludwig. So this is a very rock-sounding kit. So same brand, but we're gonna probably have to modify the sound a lot. I'm gonna leave the amps out of the equation for now and bring them back up in the production section. Because more than Jeff Buckley and his amazing performance, so much of this video is about Andy Wallace, because this is one of the few records where Andy Wallace is both a producer and a mixer. And the quicker we can start to understand how those two things combine together, the quicker we start to understand the Jeff Buckley sound. This was the only Jeff Buckley record out there. Andy Wallace's techniques and the Jeff Buckley sort of style are sort of forever bound together because of that. So let's get into it. Andy prefers working in a pretty large room. The Bearsville studio had a massive live space. That large live room both had its advantages for the room sound, but it also had advantages for acoustic isolation. The drums were mic'd with a 421 on the kick with no kick out, placed as close to the head of the beater as possible. A 414 on the snare, the capsule is facing directly down on the head of the snare in order to reject as much hi-hat as possible. 421's close mic'd on each one of the toms, SM57 on snare bottom, AKG 451's 8 inches away from each one of the cymbals, so they're being close mic'd, and several pairs of U87s placed at different locations in the live room, and 2 different spaced pairs of U87s, one closer to the kit and one farther away. Andy even placed a blanket between the kick and the snare in order to mitigate bleed from the kick and the snare mic. This essentially allows complete and total control over the drum kit. Each one of the kit's elements is close mic'd, leaving nothing up to chance or room bleed or room ambience. Those spaced U87 pairs are entirely optional for how much he's mixing them in. The bass was reportedly an Ampeg amp, probably like an SVT if I was guessing, mic'd with a 421 alongside a DI out. The guitar was typically a Fender Vibrolux for clean sounds and a Mesa Boogie dual rectifier vibroverb for the dirty sounds. Do you ever like take a step back and realize how insane guitar verbiage is? The other day I said something like, I ran my Gibson through my Wampler Tumnus, which is basically an affordable Klon clone. Do you know how insane that sounds? Like 99% of the public will have no clue what you're talking about. But I'm sure for like 50% of you, that sentence was like completely normal. You're like, why? Yeah. So anyways, so the guitars were mic'd with a Neumann U87 and an SM57. He would place these microphones on different parts of the speaker, but equidistant from that center cone. This meant he could take 2 different tones from the same guitar take and pan one to the left and one to the right, creating a really wide guitar tone. Now, it's not a double-tracked guitar tone necessarily. It's the same take from the same speaker, but the SM57 and the U87 are going to get 2 completely different colors. Now, these instruments, again, were placed strategically in the live room in order to avoid bleed. This leads me to my next point. Andy Wallace is a very pop-sensible mixer, at least compared to some of his contemporaries in the rock world. But he didn't want to use the kind of 2-way interaction of a live band. This meant that the band performed the meat of the production live in the studio room, with guitar overdubs, any sort of orchestral elements, and I think vocals afterwards. This part is a bit more iffy, but the reason I say I think vocals afterwards is because of some of these quotes I'm getting directly from Jeff. The whole process of this album was ass backwards, Jeff Buckley said. The studio was chosen, the producer was chosen, didn't have a band. I thought I'd get it together by that time. I knew I was going to work with Andy before we got anything solid. We talked about how we wanted to record things and the way I wanted to do it. I wanted to get a big room with the band and the material, 12 mics live. Virtually, we did that. It's the virtually that I'm worried about. Basically, upon hearing some of these isolated vocal tracks, it's likely that that virtually means that the vocals were done as a complete live take after the original sessions of the instrumentals. That, of course, was done on a Neumann U87, which we can see in the Hallelujah video. So this whole production process is kind of this hybrid between extremely controlled source material, super close mic on everything, making sure you don't get a bleed on anything, but still wanting the live sound of a bunch of people in a band playing together. I'm going to take Glenn Johns as an example of kind of a different method of approaching live recording. Glenn was also really into capturing a band live interacting with each other, but his microphone techniques were more about capturing bleed. He wanted the sound of the room. He wanted the sound of the drum kit and the guitars and the bass to interact. Andy is very much like, I need to have these things sort of isolated so I know how to interact with them in the mix later. That's why I kind of say that he's more of this contemporary at the time engineer mixed with this old school producer ethos. Andy is known for almost exclusively using an SSL 4000E console with very little outboard gear. And the way Andy did this is by having a lot of EQ options sort of figured out already. Let's go back to the bass example. He's got the DI, he's got the amp. He can blend between these 2 signals seamlessly. He's defining parameters for how he's going to balance an EQ before he ever touches a bass, mid, or treble control. We're basically getting to the next section, so go ahead and flash the title card for the next section. By the way, if you're enjoying this, if you think that this is all very rich information, please give it a like, a share, and a subscribe. It's how these videos perform in the algorithm, and it would mean a lot. Thank you so much. So Andy's mixing methods are very systematic. Beyond the SSL console, Andy often records with vocal compression on the way in, about -2 to 3 decibels on an LA2A compressor. This is one of the only pieces of outboard that he uses. He usually has 5 inserts set up. He has 3 different reverbs of different size, a plate or a room reverb, a hall reverb, and a cathedral reverb. In the case of Jeff Buckley, these are primarily used on the vocal. Then we have a stereo chorus, which is primarily being used on the bass. This kind of provides a sense of movement and takes the bass from a mono element to having subtle sort of variation between the left and right. Here's an example using our recorded bass. And then he has a short delay, usually about 300 milliseconds. These are kind of the Andy Wallace signature tools. And another wild thing about his methods, he doesn't really like to use compression. He'll either use clip gain if he's in the digital world, or in the case of the Jeff Buckley record, he will ride the volume fader. He rides that volume fader to keep the vocal on top of the mix, and the result is a consistent dynamic that doesn't necessarily impart a sound. You know, a lot of compressors, especially ones that are based on analog tools or are analog tools, they do have a hint of sort of harmonic distortion that gives it sort of a trademark character. Andy usually isn't going for this, and he even mentions in one interview that with Jeff, they both were really interested in preserving dynamics. Right, so there's a lot more to this, but why don't we start with just the production techniques, the microphone placement, how we're going to mitigate bleed in this small space, and then we'll apply more mixing methods from Andy Wallace to our actual recorded example. The footage you're about to see is from when this studio space was about halfway built, so we're going to go back in time a little bit, but let's see how shoot day went. So our drum kit was mic'd in nearly an identical fashion as they did in the original record. We used 421 minis, which have a very similar voicing to the original 421s. We put those on the toms and then inside the kick near the front of the beater. We used an Austrian Audio OC818, which is, in my opinion, just a better 414 in every way. They sound very similar. It has better RF rejection. It's built like a tank. And the original people who worked on the 414 designed that one. So that's on the snare, facing the snare, rejecting the hi-hat. SM57 on the bottom of the snare, and each cymbal was close mic'd, this time with Lauten LA120s, 8 inches away from the cymbals, and then we used a Sennheiser Mark IV 8 inches away from the one extra cymbal that we had. Michael had to play very gently, not only because we have a much larger kit than they did, but because all the other musicians are in the room. We're trying to not get a lot of drum bleed, and the drum kit is by far the loudest signal. Now let's get into some of those drum mixing techniques. Andy liked to gate both the snare and the kick. So this is how we're even further isolating and mitigating bleed. If we use the gate on the UA SSL channel strip, we get this effect on the kick and snare. Whenever we start to add in the cymbals, it gets a bit more natural. As always, shout out to Michael for being the drummer on all these sessions. You can hire him for your song. Many of you already do that, but he loves it when you reach out. Quick reminder that if you want to see the mix breakdown and me kind of walk you through this entire session, that is over on Patreon. Over there, you will find a mix breakdown for every single recreation and every single project on this channel. That's all for $5 a month. If you want to get the mix tracks, that's $8 a month, and the raw tracks for you to practice recording on are here already in the description down below. You don't have to pay for that. There is no compression at all on this drum sound. Everything is volume automation in post. Either that or clip gain. Much of this was hand automated. That goes for everything, the vocals, the guitar, and the drums. With this thing, it's the Korg Nano Control 2. Andy had really nice motorized faders. We have a $40 MIDI controller. I chose not to use drum samples on the kick and snare, although Andy does use drum samples on the kick and snare. So let's see how this drum sound starts to build. Now bass was simply a jazz bass, just like they used, going directly DI into the interface. Shout out to David for playing bass. You can check him out here. I used the Universal Audio Ampeg amp simulator with just a DI signal, and then we blended them. We added that stereo chorusing effect as well. Shout out to JP Henry for showing how you can do this on a free Valhalla plugin. These are my settings. These are actually just his settings. So here's his video. You should definitely go watch it. Let's start to build up this bass tone and then add it to the drums. For the electric, it is just an American Standard Telecaster into my Fender Deluxe Reverb Tone Master. The Lauten LA220 serving as the role of the U87, and then just an SM57. Remember, they're both equidistant from the center of the speaker, and then panned to make a really wide electric guitar. We then repeated this process for a second electric guitar. This one was my Les Paul. I didn't have the Tele anymore when we did overdubs. Shout out to Sammi on guitar. You can check out her work with Katz Pascale. I actually just produced their last single. And the acoustic was simply Taylor's Martin. You've seen Taylor on the videos as well. You can check out his music here. That's just mic'd with a Lauten Clarion and then double tracked as an overdub later. Let's hear how all of these guitars start to build on top of each other and on the mix. So the keys were just the Nord organ sound. Shout out to Jordan. You can again hire him for keys on your work if you want. Here is his information. But I kind of thought I wanted more. The Nord organ was just feeling a little bit fake for me. So this is not anything you have to do. But Jenna just happens to be an insane cello player. And something told me that having cello to add more air to the organ sound would be like sick as fuck. So we added cello as a blend into the organ sound to give it sort of a harmonium sound, which is the original instrument on the record. I don't know that many people that have a cello, but I thought it would be cool, and it was. Here's how those sounds start to build on top of each other. So we used the 876 onboard compressor. This gave us a light amount of compression before we actually hit the computer, just like how Andy Wallace uses a light amount of compression on the LA2A before hitting the SSL. This is where the vocals got a bit tricky, and I'm gonna be honest with you, it's not always a perfect execution. We definitely got bleed in our signal. In order to try my best to mitigate this, we made a makeshift gobo with some spare acoustic panels, which you can see I installed super professionally and really well.
You're on top of the 414's cable.
You should ask Ian now.
Then glued together with some slight compression on the SSL comp, and then run through the vocal delays, which were a room reverb, the cathedral reverb, and the hall reverb.
Too young to hold on, too old to just break free and run. When he feels like he should be having his fun, but still blind to see the damage he's done.
90% of controlling vocal dynamics beyond that compressor was volume automation. This gives the vocal a sense of movement as well as helping it stay on top of the rest of the mix without compression. I want to show you how that sounds on kind of the vocal crescendo.
Oh, love, will I wait for love?
So, after this crazy intense study of Jeff Buckley and Andy Wallace, the big question remains, did I do it? Did I make it all the way to the end of this with just one EQ and one compressor? Well, I will say it is the closest I have ever come. I've hardly used any compression at all. And I used the SSL channel compressor for 70% of it. 30% or so does have some Ableton EQ8. That's the only other thing I used. I felt whenever I needed to get out room resonances, bleed, I know the EQ8 like the back of my hand, and it really helped me sort of just get rid of that stuff and then use the SSL as kind of the more stylistic EQ. I think somebody with much greater understanding and better control over an SSL EQ could probably do this entire thing with a single SSL EQ on each channel. But you tell me, I'm gonna take all the EQ8s out of the mix and you tell me if it really made that much of a difference or if I'm being psychotic.
It's never over. All my riches for her smile when I've slept so soft against her. It's never over. All my blood for the sweetness of her laughter.
I am really proud though. This is both the most minimal amount of mixing I've ever done, but also kind of maximal in the way that it was a lot of volume automation and kind of being musical with it. I mean, look at me like jamming out on those faders. Like it's kind of a very human experience. Here is Lover, You Should Have Come Over. Enjoy.
Looking at the door, I see the rain fall upon the funeral mourners, parading in a wake of sad relations as their shoes fill up with water. Maybe I'm too young to keep good love from going wrong. But tonight, you're on my mind. Broken down and hungry for your love, with no way to feed it. Well, returns and yearns for a sleep that won't ever come. It's never over. My kingdom for a kiss upon her shoulder. It's never over. All my riches for her smile when I've slept so soft against her. It's never over. All my blood for the sweetness of her laughter. It's never over. She's the tear that hangs inside my soul forever. Oh, but maybe I'm just too young to keep good love from going wrong. You said it, mama. Yes, I feel too young to hold on, and much too old to break free and run. Too deaf and blind to see the damage I've done. Sweet lover, you should have come over. Oh, love, what I'm waiting for. Cause it's not too
All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed. See you in the next one very soon, maybe. Bye bye.